Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving deep into a remarkably intense 60-year period of history. We're talking about an era completely defined by extreme turmoil, devastating plagues, and just glaring social inequality. But almost paradoxically, it birthed a true golden age of English literature. That's right, we're talking about the Age of Chaucer, a time of massive contrasts that acted as the ultimate catalyst for artistic genius. So, here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll be defining the Age of Chaucer. 2, we'll look at chivalry, conquest, and pride. 3, plague, poverty, and corruption. 4, Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. And finally, number 5, the massive literary explosion that followed. All right, let's jump right in with Section 1, defining the Age of Chaucer, from 1340 to 1400. This era is officially dated from 1340 to 1400, basically marking the tail end of the medieval period in England. Now, it's incredibly rare for historians to name an entire epic after a single author, but in literary history, this era is quite literally bookended by Geoffrey Chaucer's birth in 1340 and his death in 1400. His life perfectly, and I mean perfectly, mirrored the rapid seismic shifts happening all across the nation at the time. Just think about how volatile that 60-year span was. We're covering 3 completely different English monarchs in rapid succession. It starts with Edward III in the 1340s, shifts to Richard II in the 1370s, and wraps up with Henry IV by the 1390s. Imagine living through that constant transition of power, the shifting alliances, the dramatic changes in national policy. It was just a remarkably dense, hyper-accelerated period of history. Let's move right along to Section 2, chivalry, conquest, and pride. There's this incredible quote from historian W.H. Hudson, where he states that Edward's reign was the midsummer of English chivalry. I absolutely love that phrasing, midsummer. It implies a peak, right? This radiant, almost dreamlike zenith of medieval civilization. The spirit of the king's court was just drenched in romantic idealism, the exact kind of buoyant, optimistic courage that fills Chaucer's own Knight's Tale. And the historical records completely back this up. England was basically going forth on this massive career of foreign conquests, and they were in a mood of supreme confidence. I'm talking sweeping, definitive victories at Crecy and Poitiers that just skyrocketed national ambition. Every fresh triumph stimulated the nation's ego, to the point where this period reads a lot more like a brilliant novel than a piece of sober history. From the outside, England looked invincible. But then we hit Section 3, where things take a dark turn: plague, poverty, and corruption. You see, beneath that midsummer dream, this was an era defined by glaring social contrasts. As trade increased, you had this brand new commercial class emerging, and they were just rolling in newfound wealth, right alongside the traditional nobility. But the reality for the masses? Completely different story. The vast majority of people lived in deplorable poverty and absolute misery. This astronomical wealth gap created a deeply fractured society that was basically a powder keg waiting for a spark. And then the absolute apocalypse arrived. Between 1348 and 1349, a fierce plague broke out across the country. We know it today as the Black Death. Now, I really want you to let this number sink in. 1/3. In a single year, nearly 1/3 of the entire population of England died. It's honestly almost impossible for us to fully comprehend that level of sudden, inescapable loss. Every neighborhood, every family, every trade, completely devastated. And the nightmare didn't even end in 1349. Epidemic after epidemic just kept ravaging the country. The plague reappeared in 1362, then again in 1367, and again in 1370, and each time with the exact same fierceness. Plus, if you somehow managed to survive the disease, you weren't safe yet because these epidemics were immediately followed by fierce, widespread famine. As our source material powerfully states, these events took away much of the glory of England. That midsummer of chivalry, it was well and truly dead. Which brings us to Section 4, Chaucer and the Canterbury Tales. So all of this massive misery was followed by a wave of unprecedented hypocrisy and corruption, specifically within the clergy. And this is exactly where Geoffrey Chaucer stepped in and changed literature forever. ever. He completely abandoned those romantic tales of flawless knights, and instead he painted the shocking state of the religious world with brutal realism in his Canterbury Tales. He lampooned the monk, the friar, the summoner, and the pardoner, basically holding a giant mirror up to spiritual leaders who were busy exploiting a traumatized, poverty-stricken population.
And that leads us to our final section. Section 5, the literary explosion. The sheer volume of literary output that followed this period is just staggering. Chaucer essentially laid the groundwork almost single-handedly for generations of major voices well into the 16th century. He proved, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that the English language could capture the full, messy spectrum of human experience, from the highest noble all the way down to the lowest corrupt official.
We're not just talking about names and dates here. We are talking about the foundational pillars of modern English literature. Building directly on Chaucer's cultural awakening, we get these monumental literary firsts. Nicholas Udall gave us the very first comedy, Roister Doister. Thomas Sackville wrote the first tragedy, Gorboduc. We also get Sir Thomas Malory's massive 15th century epic, Morte d'Arthur, and Sir Thomas More's visionary 1516 text, Utopia. The very structural DNA of the stories we consume today, it was forged right here.
And, it wasn't just the writers who came decades later. His direct contemporaries and immediate successors completely seized this new literary momentum, too. You've got William Langland writing Piers the Plowman, and John Gower with Confessio Amantis. Crucially, we also see revolutionary religious translations that finally made the ultimate text accessible to the masses, like Wycliffe translating the Bible, and later William Tyndale translating the New Testament. They were all using the written word to try and make sense of a world that had been violently torn between extreme wealth and extreme devastation.
So, what's the big takeaway from this explainer? It's the profound realization that from the ashes of unimaginable poverty, relentless, repetitive plagues, and widespread institutional corruption, an unparalleled artistic vision arose. The Age of Chaucer was essentially a pressure cooker. The extreme contrast between the romantic ideals of the king's court and the miserable reality of the streets practically forced writers to abandon comfortable fantasies and actually engage with the real world. That friction, right there, birthed a golden age of literature. Which leaves us with a really fascinating and maybe a little unsettling question to ponder as we wrap up today. Looking at how the Black Death and deep social corruption directly fueled the realism and brilliance of Chaucer and his successors, does it take the absolute extremes of a society in crisis to inspire a literary legacy that actually stands the test of time? Think about the art being created during our own times of global crisis today, and how history might look back on it. Thank you so much for exploring the Age of Chaucer with me today, and keep questioning the world around you.